It's not completely passive, but it's passive enough. All I can say is I'll work it backwards here. I've tracked my time pretty religiously for the last 5 or 6 years, and I average about 2 hours per week on my real estate business. And that's real. That's real numbers. But what I'll say is it didn't start that way.
More and more people want the flexibility to earn money outside of a traditional office setting. If you're interested in part-time money, side hustles, or full-time work, the number of opportunities to work from anywhere is growing. On our Work From Anywhere segment today, we're going to interview our friend Chad Carson once again. Chad, or Coach Carson, began investing in real estate at 23 years old, soon after ending his career as a college football linebacker at Clemson University. And after initially flipping houses and surviving the 2009 financial crisis, which a lot of us have experienced in the past, he transitioned to long-term income properties, which made him financially independent in his 30s. Now at 43, Chad works less than 2 hours per week on his real estate. He uses the time and freedom to live abroad. He did that for over a year with his wife and 2 kids, both in Spain and Ecuador. And he's now on a mission to help small investors get out of the financial grind like he did so they can do more of what matters. He publishes a weekly podcast called Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson, and he wrote a new Bigger Pockets book called The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor: How to Reach Financial Freedom with Fewer Rental Properties. Today, we're going to discuss with Chad how small real estate investors can build their way to $10,000 per month in cash flow. Welcome back to the show, Chad.
Andy, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back. You and I connected recently at a conference, but we haven't done this podcast together on Marriage, Kids, and Money in 6 years. Isn't that wild?
I can't believe how time is flying as a parent, as a podcaster. This is amazing.
I know, man. I love it. Well, I like this conversation around being a small and mighty real estate investor. Let's talk about what that means. How would you define what that means to be a small and mighty real estate investor?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the higher level definition, and I'll give you some specifics so everybody can kind of pinpoint where it is. The way I define a small and mighty investor is sort of the opposite of what you normally hear online with real estate, because typically you hear to be successful, you have to 10x, you got to have hundreds of units, you got to have 1,000 units. Those are the people with the airplanes. Those are the successful people, and all of us little peons on the bottom are just kind of climbing the ladder until we're eventually successful. Well, I try to flip that on the head with the definition of a small mighty investor. A small mighty investor has the least number of properties needed to financially accomplish your goals. So it's the least instead of the most. It's kind of like I was a biology major in college, and there was this definition called the Occam's razor, which was about, in science, the theory that's the simplest is typically the right one that you want to use. And so this is sort of that approach with real estate investing and with finance. Is the simplest solution you can have is the best, because you get the money you need, but then you have the time, the mobility, the flexibility to do all those things you want to do. So that's like the higher level definition. But in practical terms, most people that I see, I mean, I've had people that I've seen with 1 or 2 properties that I featured in the book. And then I'm on the bigger kind of side of a small and mighty investor. I have a business partner, and the 2 of us have 33 properties together. So you could say like my half is like 15 or 16 properties. And then some of those are multifamily properties. So we also have, I have about 50 units on my side. My business partner has about 50. So, somewhere in between there is a happy space. We could talk about what the numbers look like, depending on if you're like a low cost of living area, a high cost of living area. But the point is, you don't have to have hundreds of properties. 1 or 2 properties, 5 properties, 10 properties can accomplish a whole lot of financial goals.
So what you're saying is, if I don't have the jet, I'm still okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The jet and the Lamborghini and the house and, the second house in Hawaii, all those, none of that is necessary.
It's pretty pervasive out there in the social media landscape, at least every time I go on there. So I'm glad to hear your message. I agree with you. The problem with more and more and more and more is that it never ends. And I don't think that's the type of message that we're trying to put out there. There's a level to which what you need. I mean, even a little bit of what you want can be solved with a lot of these types of things. Now you've been involved in real estate for, what is it, 20 years now, Chad?
21 years, yeah.
21 years, that's incredible. Now, the game has probably changed a lot for you in 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit how it's changed or would you do things differently than you did when you started at this point?
Yeah, the way my journey as a rental investor started, I've sort of been where I had to survive first. So like I graduated from college and I had to just put food on the table as an entrepreneur. So it really, if you got technical, I was actually not investing in real estate when I first started. I was actually flipping houses
Mhm.
and finding deals. And that's just like somebody who sells cars or somebody who sells, any kind of widget, or somebody who's a technician, like I was just trying to put food on the table. That's what I did for the first 5 or 6 years that I was in my early 20s. But eventually I started getting into the game of doing like house hacking, where you live in one, you live in one unit and have a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex or a accessory dwelling unit or something, and you rent those out to help pay for your living expenses. Once I started doing that, started dip my toe in the buy and hold rental world, I realized like it's not going to make me rich overnight, but man, if I could really like start planting these seeds of these long-term rental properties, eventually those seeds will blossom into these fruit trees that will pay me over and over and over again. And so I kind of started with the quick flip, kind of making active money, but then now I spend almost all my time, and that's really what's changed a lot for me, is that I mainly invest in rental properties. And it's the cool thing about that is it's passive enough. I don't, it doesn't get 100% passive, but I spend very little time now that I have a mature portfolio. You can get a full-time income eventually. It takes some time, but without having to, take all the time of a job or flipping houses or doing all that.
I love that. Yeah, no, something that has changed over the 20 years are mortgage interest rates. Now, I was looking back at the history. They're kind of similar to probably when you started in the game, but should that give people pause right now with how high mortgage interest rates are with investing in real estate?
I think if you were investing 2 or 3 years ago and interest rates were 4%, and now you're looking at 7 or 8%, it's challenging to get your head around. But I think like anything in life, you have to take some historical context. And I always like studying history of whatever you're trying to do. And in real estate investing, historically, 6 to 7% interest rates have been sort of the norm for most of at least the modern history of the United States, at least. And so I think to take that into account, that is pretty normal to have this. The other thing to take into account is these things change over time. And in the current climate we're in 2024, if you're listening to this, as things change, there's a lot of opportunity because everybody else is kind of throwing their hands up saying, oh man, you can't make deals cash flow. But what it actually means is it's a little bit more of a normal market, because a couple of years ago when interest rates were really low, it was really difficult. You have to compete with dozens of people to buy a property. And so I think there's the flip side of a changing interest rate market is that if you can figure out how to do that, if you can think outside the box, get creative, buy properties at a little bit lower prices, then you can actually find more opportunities than were available 2 or 3 years ago.
I love that. Yeah, that's a very good point. The competition's a little lower, even though the price might be slightly higher than what it is, but historically pretty normal. Yeah. Let's talk about this general case study. If somebody wants to say, "Hey, this would be great. I think I could get into this. I understand that it's going to take some time, but I would love to eventually make $10,000 a month and have this be whether as a side hustle in the beginning or eventually my full-time income and do what Chad's doing, where it's just a few hours a week." Is this feasible for someone to eventually do in the market that we're in right now, to make $10,000 per month in real estate?
Yeah, it's totally doable. And I'll give you like, I like simple math. Like I like to give, but I like to give examples because I think it makes it more real. Is that, let's just say like over the very long term, let's say over the next 30 years, you want to accomplish the 10,000 a month. And I'm going to show you how you could probably do that sooner, but let's start with a more conservative approach, that if you just bought one property per year, and let's say this property in today's terms rents for like $1,800 per month. And I picked that number because that's in my area. I know if you're in California, in the Bay Area, maybe the rentals are 2,500 to 3,000. If you're in some areas, it might be $1,000, but my area, you can get a single family house that rents for about $1,800 per month. Now, the important part of those numbers is that one property, you have expenses on that property. You have to pay taxes, insurance, maintenance. You probably want to hire a property manager in some cases. So let's just say that out of that 1,800 you collect every month, $800 is gone in all those operating expenses. And that's everything but your mortgage payment. And I'll tell you why in just a second. So you'll have to get a mortgage payment too. But my game plan would be, let's buy one property per year for the next 5 years or 5 to 10 years. But then over the next 30 years, you pay that property off because your tenants, you're collecting rent, use that rent to pay your mortgage payment. Maybe you're able to save up a little bit extra money. and you pay off the debt. So I know you've been into debt payoff in the past, right, as well, personally, but you can also do this with your rental properties. You can use it as a retirement plan to use all your extra cash flow to pay off the debt on your properties. You can do like a debt snowball, or you could sell some properties and pay some off. We could talk about some of those details, but the point is, if you had 10 properties, each one rented for $1,800, you had $800 in expenses on each property. The simple math is each property, if you paid all the debt off, would produce $1,000 per month in net rent after all those expenses. So $1,000 times 10 is $10,000 per month, or $120,000 per year. And it's very doable that over the next 30 years, you could save up extra cash, buy those properties, pay them off. And that you would still be way ahead of almost everybody else who's trying to retire, because you'd have these rental properties that today rent for $1,800, but they're probably going to rise. The rent's going to go up with inflation over time. It's not going to be, consistent. It goes flat for a couple of years and it goes up. But the point is, like, these simple little single family houses that you buy one at a time could turn into 120,000 or the equivalent in the future, just being like a small money investors, doing a little bit at a time. And I'd love to talk about how you could accelerate that, but I just want to let that sink in, because just such a simple plan. It always blows me away. 10 properties, 10,000 a month, $120,000 per year. And it doesn't have to be that complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you think about traditionally investing in a 401k or things like that, it could just as long take 30 years, 40 years for you to build up that amount in order for you to live, live on in retirement. Actually, probably even more difficult, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I like stock investing too. I like index funds. So it's not an either or. But I think for those of us who like to have a little bit more control, or maybe we even could say we're control freaks, like we like to know that we have a little bit more influence over our retirement. That's what real estate's for. Real estate is something that people say the negative is that you have to get your hands dirty a little bit and go in and buy the property. I say the positive is that you get to go in and get your hands dirty, because you get to choose the property you buy. You get to choose the financing you get to choose your tenants, or choose the manager who gets the tenants. And so I think it gives me a lot of empowerment and hope that, okay, I've got some control over this. This is not something where the stock market is just going to go up and down, and I'm going to have to be nervous about that. It is something that, especially if you want to retire earlier too, you can influence that. You could pay it off. You could pay the debt off earlier. You could buy 15 or 20 properties instead of 10, and then sell some of those properties to pay off the other ones. So it's I think all of that is a really empowering reason that people get into real estate, and it's worth, the quote hassle or the extra effort you have to put in to get the properties up front.
I love that. Well, let's talk about some first steps then. Let's say I like this plan of the 10 houses in 30 years, and yes, I'll figure out ways to accelerate it over time as I grow some skills, or learn to pay it down. What's the first step if somebody's walking through that process to get that first house? Like, this is new, this is brand new, but they're interested.
Yeah, I think getting your foot in the door is always the hardest thing when you're starting something new, but luckily with real estate, it is also one of the more approachable investments. And I mentioned earlier, kind of in passing, the way I got started with rental properties is still my favorite today, is something called house hacking. And so here's the concept. In general, you have to live somewhere and you have to have a residence. So why not combine the idea of living in a residence with your first rental property as well? That's what house hacking is. And there's a lot of cool variations on how you can do this. The classic way that I did was I bought a 4-unit building. So I had one roof, 4 units. I lived in unit number 2 because that was the least desirable unit. And I wanted to rent the other 3 units out that were more desirable and easier to rent. But I fixed this property up as a 24-year-old. And the cool thing about moving into your rental property is the financing is always the hard part. And owner occupant financing for real estate, they have 3.5% down payment programs. They have 5% down payment programs. If you're a veteran, thank you for your service, you can get a 0% down payment VA loan. And so all of these owner occupant financing programs are out there with lower down payments, with really good interest rates compared to a typical investment loan, which would be like 20% down or 25% down. So let's just make those numbers real. If it's a $300,000 property and you want to buy it, 5% down is $15,000 instead of having to put up 30, 40, 50,000 bucks. So that's kind of the most approachable way to get into investing. Now, not everybody wants to live in a residence, and I get that. So it's not for everybody, but if you're willing to do that, I'd say that's plan A. Plan B is just to buy a simple single family house or a small multifamily property and just save up some cash. You might have to save up the cash to do that first down payment. Maybe partner with somebody else to do it if you don't have all the money. But if you could just get your foot in the door, that you almost get a university education just on that one property. And then you take a deep breath, then you start doing the next one. But getting that first one, I think, is always the most important one.
I love that. So I like the A, B, and the C. I mean, like, let's talk C. Let's just say I don't have a lot of time, but I do have money right now, and I'm fine with being a long-term investor. I know this might take me a while. Is there a C level where I'm connecting with somebody who can manage this property for me while I don't have time? I do have money pooled up in a, maybe I had it as an FU fund or something like that, and I'm ready to use that to invest in real estate. Talk to us about that C level.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, really, I think this game, you either have the money or you have the time. That's usually like people are on either extreme. And when I first started, I had no money, but I had a ton of time. And so what I did was I found these folks who had a lot of money, like they were an attorney or they were just really busy in the corporate world, but they liked real estate and they knew about real estate. And so I was a little deal finder who went out and found these houses. And then we essentially just partnered together on a rental property. And the basic, there's some different ways you can structure it, but the basic idea was I found a good solid rental property. Let's say it's a $300,000 property, and I just got a really good deal on it. I bought it for $200,000, well below value. That doesn't happen every day, right? But if you look and look and look, and you buy one property per year, it's possible to find something you buy for 200, 250 that's worth 300. It's definitely possible. And so then I go to my partner and I say, all right, I have this great deal. I found it. I'm willing to manage it. I'm willing to take care of all the hassles for it. I just want somebody to put up the money. So I need somebody to put up the down payment and get a loan to buy the property, to use your credit. And then we'll figure out a way we'll split the cash flow, we'll split the expenses, and then we'll split the profit once it goes up in value. So like the plan might be, we're going to hold this property that today is worth $300,000 until it appreciates to $600,000. And then at that point, we will reassess what we want to do, but we could sell it. We could refinance it. We could pay each other off. But that's a really simple approach to owning one rental property. And it's a win for me as the entrepreneur because I didn't put up any money, and yet I get half of the profit, which might be several $100,000 one of these days. And this person who had no time got to put up their money into a deal and put no more time into it. It's a passive investment. And then if you check out the return on investment for that passive investor. I did that with several investors, and they wanted to do more. They're like, okay, when's the next deal coming, Chad? When's the next one? So it's truly a win-win deal. That's really a cool way to structure it.
I love that. Now it sounds like a big part of that formula is making connections, making community. Where do you connect with potential partners or even people that are willing to help you to take care of the property? Where's that connection happen? Because I know community can be a big part of this.
Yeah, this is really the work of real estate. And you think it's about the property, but it's more about the people. And it's about meeting people. So people really unlock this entire business. And so if you're sort of a wallflower or an introvert, that's okay, right? But you have to get outside your comfort zone. And I think the best places are real estate meetups. Every single city of any size if you look on meetup.com, if you look on Facebook groups, if you look at Bigger Pockets and go to their forums and look for local groups, there's tons and tons and tons of networks or networking opportunities. And so what do? You go there and don't have any like immediate expectations. But if you're the money person, you have a little pitch, you have a little story, a little elevator pitch where you talk about what you're doing. You say, I've got some money, I'm looking to buy some rental properties, and you just talk to people to see what they're up to. And then you're kind of looking for that profile of that person who it might be a young or maybe a young at heart entrepreneur who's new to the game, who's looking for private money or looking for capital. That happens all the time. And you just have to get out there and talk to people and network. And if you're the person who has no money, sometimes you have to get it in your head. It's hard to believe that you have something of value to add to those people with the money. But I promise you, the person with a deal is actually more valuable than the person with the money, because there's a ton of money out there. But if you're a trustworthy person who's willing to treat people well and sharing your profits with somebody else, there's money out there. You just got to meet them, and just don't be in a hurry. You don't want to it's like kind of like a marriage. You don't want to jump into a marriage right away. You want to date a little bit. You want to get to know each other. You take your time, understand if you're aligned, if you have similar values. But once you find that person, I've worked with the same private lenders and partners for 21 years. Like, it's just a repeat business. It's worth it because once you take care of each other, I've kept a small group of people who've helped each other out over a long period of time. And the idea is that trust is really fast. Like, when you trust people, the whole business flows and it makes it easier. And so it's worth the effort up front to build those trusting relationships.
I love that. Now, you've been at this for 20 years. You and I chatted 5 or 6 years ago, and you still had this beautiful time freedom that we were talking about before. Talk about what that time freedom has allowed you to do as a father, as a community member. How has it changed your life?
Yeah. So my wife and I, when we first met, like on our first date, literally, we talked about like, hey, would it be cool to go travel abroad and live abroad somewhere? Because she was a Spanish teacher and she had done that. She went to Guatemala and backpacked, and her whole family from St. Louis was like, you're crazy. We don't know where you came from, but you like to travel around the world. And I thought, you're wonderful. That's amazing. I want to do that too. And so we sort of gelled on that idea. And once we got married, 2009, we went and backpacked around South America and Spain, and I learned to speak Spanish. So that was sort of my hobby on the side. That was actually my pickup line with my wife, was like, hey, we're in yoga class. You teach Spanish? I want to learn Spanish. Wouldn't that be cool? As corny as that sounds, that it worked. It worked with her.
It worked.
And so we've been going on these, so-called mini retirements ever since then. And so we started in 2009 before kids. We went for 4 months, and we weren't financially independent at that point. We just saved up our cash, like you save up money for a car. And we went and took our backpacks and traveled around, and it was the best experience I've ever had. It was like a unlock moment for me, because I'm sort of a type A go-getter, goal setter, which maybe a lot of people listening to this, if you're a financial freedom type person, you're probably have some leanings that way. It took me like 6 weeks just to relax, just to take it easy. And I could almost feel like an unlocking in my chest. It's like, and so once I got hooked on that, this idea of like, it's almost like you're climbing a mountain. Financial freedom's at the top, but that's a long journey. Along the way, you take these plateaus and you take a break, whether it's 2 weeks, 4 months. Eventually, for us, once we had kids, we went for 17 months to Ecuador. I think that's the last time we talked on the podcast, and we lived there, and our kids were 3 and 5, and we wanted them to become fluent in Spanish and experience another culture. And so they went to local schools. We got to know the parents of other people at the school. We got to know other expats living in the area. This was in Cuenca, Ecuador. And again, just an amazing experience with my kids. I got to see them go from like scratch, not speaking any Spanish, to like flying past me and like correcting me at the table saying, Papa, no se dice eso, no puede hablar. So you can't speak that way, Dad. You're talking with a bad accent. And I loved it. I loved being corrected by my kids. And so we've done these intermittently. We did it in 2009, 17, and then we did it again last year in 2022 and 23, where we moved to Spain, to Granada, Spain. And our kids were 10 and 12 at that point. Wow. So a little bit older. And we're kind of on the cusp of a new era now. My older daughter's like, I'm not sure I want to do these trips anymore, Dad. I want to stay home. But that's life. Things change a little bit. But it's given us this space and this time to not just rush through life, just to be present, to have something new with our kids, to give them an experience, to get to know them better, to get to know each other better. So it's been the best thing for our marriage, first and foremost, and our family, I think. But it's also been really good for me as just a personal growth and kind of pushing back on those tendencies, which I think are pretty common in our culture, to always go, rush. And all of a sudden you wake up 30 years later and you've missed some of the experiences that you really wished you would have paid attention to.
I love that. Yeah, it gives you that time freedom, gives you that margin, as you talked about these plateaus where you can just breathe it in a little bit and decide, am I headed in the right path? Am I enjoying the family path that we're on? And is it the way that we want to continue listening? Now there's somebody who maybe found this podcast or they're listening online and they see the headline of making $10,000 per month in passive income. And Chad, they're calling BS, man. They're saying that the real estate requires a ton of work. It should not be considered passive income at all. What would you say to that person?
Well, I'll give them this. I'll say it's not completely passive, but it's passive enough. And I all I can say is I'll work it backwards here. I've tracked my time pretty religiously for the last 5 or 6 years, and I average about 2 hours per week on my real estate business. And that's real. That's real numbers. But what I'll say is it didn't start that way. And so real estate investing is really interesting. It's something that begins like a startup business, like a venture capital startup business, where yes, you got to put a lot of time in to meet those investors, to find that property, to get the property rehabbed maybe, and to manage that. And so it's a lot of work on the front end, and that's almost like you have to pay your dues. It's like your psychological and time down payment on the front end. But that's what everybody talks about. Everybody talks about that period at the front. What they don't talk about is that once that property is stabilized, I've interviewed tons and tons of my students, my readers, my podcast listeners. On average, is 2 to 4 hours per month is what a lot of, if you have 5 properties, 3 properties, then what is that 3 to 5 hours per month? That's doing things like bookkeeping. That's managing the manager. And every once in a while, yes, you're going to get a call like I got a couple weeks ago where a water main broke on our 12-unit building and it's rushing everywhere. And they're going to have to dig up a big trench and cut down a bunch of trees. And it's going to cost me thousands of dollars to do all that. But you know what? How much time did that take me? It took me a few texts. It took me a phone call. It took me less than 15 minutes. It did cost me like $6,000 or $7,000 to fix all that. But the point is, if you set up systems, if you hire really good property managers, then it's just writing a check. It's paying money to someone who is a good, responsible person to help you take care of that. Now, could that be a little stressful? Oh my gosh, I got to pay $6,000. Yes, and I wish that wouldn't happen. But my main concern was, hey, can we get this tackled quickly so that our tenants have water, so they're not put out by this? And so real estate is a business that starts off heavy on the involvement, but it's unlike a lot of other businesses. Like if you were to own a plumbing business or you own any other kind of blue collar business, it's a lot more difficult to make passive than rental properties. Rental properties are something that you can hire people, build systems. There's technology right now that makes it easier. It hasn't kept me from traveling the world, living abroad for 17 months, hasn't kept me from being a podcaster, from being a parent, from coaching my kids' volleyball teams. I mean, it's a really flexible, passive enough business if you work at it and you build it with the intention of not growing to 1,000 units, but just having a small, mighty portfolio that runs well, and then you go and do your thing.
I love that, man. I love that. Great answer. And it's so true. I mean, it is a business, but the upside of putting in the work and then the long-term value can create it to be passive enough, as you said. Now, you talk about being a small and mighty real estate investor. Talk to us about your new book and definitely your podcast. Where should they go to connect with these great resources?
Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. It's been a lot of fun, as always. The book I wrote this is my second book I wrote. The first one was about retiring early with real estate. It was sort of like the map or the guide on how to get to the top of the mountain that I talked about. And I always had an itch, though, because I think to write a book, you have to have a really strong itch because it's not very fun to put it together. At least it wasn't for me. But this book is more of the handbook for the tactical side of things of how to be a rental investor. And so there's the strategy of being a small and mighty investor, why to keep it small. I have a lot of examples, a lot of stories. I featured stories throughout the book of other people, not just me, who've done it in different ways. But then like the hamburger, the meat of the book is the tactics. Like, how do you finance it? How do you find deals? How do you negotiate them? I told the stories of how I negotiated my first few purchases and how I bought them with seller financing or negotiated unusual terms. So there's those questions that you always have, like, okay, that's great. You could buy 10 properties per year, but how do you actually do the tactics of it, like the day-to-day stuff of it? How do you manage it? How do you do bookkeeping? That is what I was really passionate about, was being a coach, being a teacher, to teach how to do it, how to ride the bike, so to speak. And so that's what the book is. And hopefully it's for people who actually want to take this and have a handbook to kind of help them implement it. That was my intention, and have gotten a lot of good feedback from people who've read the book. So I would love for people to get that. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Bigger Pockets through my publisher. And if you get it through Bigger Pockets, I had a lot of bonuses and some cool stuff that kind of add on that make it easier to apply it. For example, I had a bonus chapter on how to do small and mighty investing in the changing economy with higher interest rates specifically. So that's something people could check out. And then my podcast is kind of taking the ideas from the book and applying those just on a week-to-week basis. I have a new episode that comes out every Monday.
Excellent. Yeah. And if you're watching on YouTube, he's got a great YouTube channel as well. Everybody, lots of great resources from Chad. Chad, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Andy.